Okay, so we are going to start on the bottom of Yud Gimel Mabez. Today's Daf Yomi is Nazir Yud Daled Nazir 14. So on the bottom of Yud Gimel Mabez, the Gemara asked the question based upon the fact that the Mishnah had said if a person says I'll be a Nazirite, and then he says I'll be a Nazirite when I have a son, first he counts the first Nazirus and then he counts Nazirus of his son. But if he says I'll be a Nazirite when I have a son and a Nazir, then he starts to count his Nazirus, and then he has a son, he stops his Nazirus and he counts the Nazirus of his son, and then he completes his own Nazirus. So the Gemara asks a question in this context. Rava asked the following question. Let's say a person says, Hareini Nazir Achar Esrim Yom. A person says, I'll be a Nazir in 20 days. And then he says, Umeachshav Me'ayom. And from right now, I'll be a Nazir for 100 days. Mahu, what will be the law in that case? Gemara says, do we say Kivan Dahalan Meya Be'esra and Wosham? And since this 100 days will not be completed, for sure will not be completed in the next 20 days, therefore Lo Chaylan, therefore we're going to say his Nazirus now doesn't start until he concludes the Nazirus that starts in 20 days, i.e. his 100 days don't start until 50 days from now. O Dilma Kivan the Islay Gidol Seyor, or do we say perhaps since even if he starts with 20 days and then he interrupts it with 30 days of the other Nazirus, and then even after that, he'll have the amount of time called Gidol Seir, means to say the Nazir can't cut his hair unless it has a growth of 30 days from that Nazirus. So therefore, since from that Nazirus, he'll have Gidol Seir, because he'll have an additional 80 days of his Nazirus. So therefore, we're going to say, since he has Gidol Seir, it will start now. We'll do his first 20 days, interrupt it with the 30 days of the other Nazirus, and then continue with the next 80 days of his Nazirus. So the Gemara says, well, why are you asking a case about a person who makes a vow of 100 days? Tibayle Nazirus Miletus. Ask about a case about a person who says, I'll be a Nazir in 20 days, and I'll be a Nazir, a regular Nazir, a 30-day Nazir from right now. So why don't we ask about that case? So the Gemara says, yeah, we're asking about that case, but we're asking one in front of the other, meaning to say we're asking both questions together, meaning to say as follows, on top of your Dawud Amid Aleph, Im Tim Salomer Nazirus Moetes, if you want to say that in the case of a Nazirus Moetes, i.e. the person says, on top of 14a, the person says, I'm going to be a Nazir now, I'm going to be a Nazir in 20 days, and then a person says, I'm going to be a Nazir starting now. So there, it's a case where the Nazirus at the end of if he starts as Nazirus now, it's 20 days, and then at the end of the next 30 days, he only has 10 days left. Given that Sarah Yomin, who the Yasirin, since he only has 10 days left at the end of it, so then, therefore, at the end of that, we're going to say, so we're going to say that since at the end of it, he only has 10 extra days, and therefore, we're going to say that that those 10 days at the end are not going to be enough for him. And so therefore, we're going to say under those circumstances, since he's not going to stop his Nazirus, and therefore his intent was to say that his Nazirus will only really start after he finishes his first Nazirus, that is in 50 days from now, then he'll start the second Nazirus. But if that's the case, Vadai Nazir, but if he says, I'm going to be Nazir Me'ayom, he says, I'm going to be a Nazirite from now for 100 days, keeping the Islay Timnin Yom and Besof, since he has 80 days at the end, we're going to say in that case his Nazirus will start from right now, and then I'll interrupt for the second Nazirus that starts in 20 days, and then I'll go back to it. Oh, or perhaps we don't say that. Im Tim Solomar Chayla, and if we're going to say that Vilomar Chayla, if we want to say that the Nazirus from 100 days starts now, and I'll stop in 20 days, and then there'll be enough time to cut your hair, well, then we're going to say, what about the following case? Let's say, Amar Harini Nazir Achar Chaf Yom Umeachshav Nazir Olam Mahu. let's say he words it differently. Let's say he says, I'll be a Nazarite in 20 days. And from now, I'm a Nazir Olam, meaning to say Nazir Olam, we've been discussing this, a person who's a Nazirite forever, but when his hair gets heavy, there's a dispute, is this after a month or after a year? After 12 months, he cuts his hair. So let's say the person says, I'll be a Nazirite in 20 days, and from now I'm a Nazir Olam. What will be the case there? Do we say Michael? Does that case, does the Nazir start right away, or does it only start after the 50 days? And this is the way, and this is the reason why we have that question. Why is it a question? Question is because it's a different type of Nazirus. So we say, really, he doesn't, do we say he doesn't mind that this Nazirus is going to be interrupted because he's a Nazir Olam, so he's going to wait the 30 days, so maybe he's not going to mind at all. And so it's a different category of Nazirus than just a regular Nazirus. And then the Gemara says, and imtim so Omar, and if you want to say in this case that where he accepts upon himself a Nazirus Olam, therefore he doesn't care if Nazirus is interrupted, given the Efshar with Shulei, because he could go to a Chacham and ask him about his Nazirus that he accepted after the Nazira Mu'etis, the regular Nazirus that accepted in 20 days, and he can annul it. And so therefore Chayla, and so therefore his Nazirus will start immediately. And if he doesn't want to stop in the middle, he can just go to Chacham and can annul his vow. But let's say he says, Hareini Nazir Shimshon. So let's say he says, I'm going to be a Nazirite for Shimshon. Or maybe he says, I'm going to be a Nazirite from Shimshon after 30 days. Nazir Stam. And right now I'm a regular Nazir. So what's the law there? By a Nazir Shimshon, he's not able to annul the vow. We can't annul if a person we've had a case of a Nazir Shimshon, a person who can never cut his hair, but can possibly come in contact with the dead, but he can never cut his hair, even if it gets heavy. And the Nazir Shimshon is something that you can't annul the vow. Why can you not annul the vow? Maybe because Shimon was a Nazir from the womb, maybe because his parents accepted upon himself, or maybe because Shimshon never annulled the vow. But anyway, we see from here, in that case, you're not able to annul it. So maybe we're going to say that this case is different. And so therefore, since you're never able to annul the vow, and so therefore, Michaela, do we say that the Nazirus of Shloshim Yom would apply right away, and after 20 days, the Nazirus of Shimshon would start? Or maybe it's not going to apply because he doesn't want to accept upon himself a Nazirus that will have to interrupt it. And so therefore, he won't take those 20 days at all. And after 20 days, the Nazirus of Shimshon will apply. The reason why you can't do that Nazirus at all is because once you start the Nazirus of Shimshon, it's forever and it never stops. So therefore, you can't accept upon yourself the other Nazirus after it. So the Gemara says, well, we have one more question. And this other question seems to be completely tangential. Once the Gemara is asking these types of questions, it throws in another one into the mix. Let's say he says, Amar Kamosha B'Shiva Ba'adar Mai. Let's say he says, I'm a Nazirite like Moses on the 7th day of Adar. What's the law in that case? What does it mean, Kamosha B'Shiva Ba'adar? So the Mefarish explains it means as follows. It implies he's like Moshe Rabbeinu, who died on the 7th day of Adar, and he never drank wine again. So is this going to be an expression of Nazirus or not? That's the explanation of the Mefarish. The Tosfos says it differently. He says, the Biyom Hivaldo, like Moshe on the 7th day of Adar, because that's his birthday. On the day he was born, that is the 7th of Adar, they rejoiced greatly. And on the day that he died, which was also the 7th of Adar, they made vows, and there were a lot of Nazirim in Israel on the day of such pain. And so he says, I'm going to be like Moshe on the 7th day of Adar, meaning to say, I'm like Moshe Rabbeinu's generation on the 7th of Adar, on the day of his death, and therefore they all accepted Nazirus. Or is it like Moshe on the day of his birth, where and they were so rejoicing. So that's um, so that's so that's the question. Meaning to say, when he says, "I'm like Moshe on the day of the seventh of Adar," question is he saying we're like Moshe's birth and it was a day of great rejoicing, or is it like Moshe's death and it's a day of great sadness where they accepted Nazirus upon themselves? Anyway, we see from here that on the day of a birth, it's a day of great rejoicing, worthy of celebrating. So the Gemara asks the question: do we say? And so the Gemara says, at least answer the first question. What was the first question of the Gemara? The first question of the Gemara was, if a person says, I'm a Nazirite after 20 days, and from now 100 days, we learn in our Mishnah that what should be the answer? Monesh Monim. We're going to say that what is the price to say? If a person says, I'm a Nazirite after 20 days, and from now I'm a Nazirite for 100 days, Monesh Monim Ba'akach Monesh Shloshim, that you count 80 days and then Mona asks him, you count 20 days and then you count the 30 days and then you count the 80 days. In order to complete the first Nazirus. So we see in that case where you accept a Nazirus in 20 days from now, and then also from now 100 days, you do start your Nazirus, you interrupt it with the second Nazirus of 30 days, and then you finish it with 80 Nazirus. So that's how you do it. So the Gemara says, but what about the following question? Nitma bin Mei Beno, going back to the case of our Mishnah. So let's say in our Mishnah had said that if a person who had said, what was the case in our Mishnah? The case of our Mishnah was a person who says, I'm a Nazirite now, and I'm a Nazirite when I'll have a son. He starts to count his Nazirus, and then he starts to count the Nazirus of his son. So, but let's say he says, I'm a Nazirite when I'll have a son, and I'm a Nazirite now. He first starts to count his Nazirus, and afterwards he counts the Nazirus of his son. But then, if he has a son in between, he stops his, and he continues with the Nazirus of his son, and then he completes his. So in this context, if a person says, I'll be a Nazirite, and I'll be a Nazirite when I have a son, and then he starts to count his Nazirus, and then he gives birth to a son. And so basically, what has he done? He's accepted upon himself the Nazirites for when he's a son. And that, he took the vow first. And then he says, I'm going to be a Nazirite. So that hasn't had the son yet. So he starts to count his own Nazirus. And then he has a Nazirus for the son. Then his son is born. So he puts aside his own Nazirus temporarily. And he starts the Nazirus of his son. But now the question is, Nitma b'mei beno. He becomes Tameh during the Nazirus of his son. So we know that if a person who's a Nazir accidentally becomes Tameh, he's so Sarah Sakol, he has to start over. So the question is, Nitma b'mei beno. If he interrupts his Nazirus because he becomes Tameh during the days of his son, Rabbi Yochanan Omer so Sarah. Rabbi Yochanan says he also loses the days, not only of the days that he was counting the Nazirus that he took upon himself when he had a son, but also the Nazirus that he started initially, the Nazirus of his own. And he's going to lose those days as well. Whereas Rish Lakish says, Eino Soser. Rish Lakish says he doesn't lose the days that he counted upon himself. Rabbi Yochanan says, Soser Chad Nazirus Arichta, that this is really looked at as one long Nazirus. Whereas Rish Lakish says, Eino Soser Nazirus today. Rish Lakish says he doesn't mess up his own Nazirus. Why? He says his own Nazirus is separate from his son, so therefore he doesn't lose his own Nazirus. So that's the dispute between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. Since when you become Tameh, you lose all the days of your counting. In this case, Rabbi Yochanan says you lose also not only the days of the Nazirus for your son, but also your own Nazirus. Rish Lakish says you don't lose your own Nazirus because his Nazirus is separate from his son. But now the Gemara asks the question: Nitma b'mei Saraso. Let's say he became Tameh during the days of his saras. So let's say a person has saras. Saras is this biblical disease called leprosy. So he becomes a tsaru on the days of his Nazirus. The law is that the days that he's a Matzorah, those don't count towards the days of his Nazirus. And if he became tamei, came in contact with a dead body in the days of his tzaras, what's going to be the law there? So Rabbi Yochanan says, since those days are carved out from the days of the Nazirus, we might think that the laws are different. But Rabbi Yochanan says we don't care. So Sarah, then if you become tamei while you're separated from your Nazirus because you're mitzora, Rabbi Yochanan says you still lose the days of your Nazirus. Whereas Rish Lakish says, "Eino so Sarah, you don't lose them." Rabbi Yochanan Amar so Sarah, Dab Nazirus kai, you're still a Nazir. Rish Lakish says, "Eino so Sarah, tzaras l'chod and Nazirus l'chod." Tzaras is separate from Nazirus. You're in your own days of tzaras. We need Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish to argue in both cases. If they're only arguing in the first case, the case of the Nazirus of himself versus the Nazirus of his son, I would say, by Rabbi Yochanan Soser, in that case, Rabbi Yochanan says you lose the days of your first Nazirus because Shem Nazirus Achasi, because they're both called Nazirus, but in the case of the Mitzora, maybe you'd agree with Rish Lakish that it's a separate case from Tzaras. Nazirus and Tzaras are two distinct units. And if you only had the case of the Nazir and the Mitzora, I might have said, here Rish Lakish says it's not so, Sarah. But where it's the case of the Nazirus of himself and his son, maybe you'd agree to Rabbi Yochanan that indeed it's going to be so, Sarah. So now the Gemara says, Nitma biyom gidol seyar. Let's say he became tamei during the days of the Gidol Seir. What's the days of the Gidol Seir? So a Nazir, let's say it's a Nazir for 30 days. He has to have a growth of 30 days in order for him to cut his hair. So let's say he's on day 20, and then these bandits come along and shave his hair. Rahmano Litzlan, they did that to him. So then, even though his Nazirus ends at day 30, he can't really end his Nazirus. He can't bring the sacrifices and cut his hair. He needs to have a 30-day growth. So therefore, he needs to wait another 20 days after his 30 days to be able to cut his hair. So during those extra 20 days, it's like extra time in soccer. It's like the extra time period in soccer. So is that going to be considered like those are still the days of Nazirus? If he becomes tamei, does he lose his count? So nidma biyom gidol seir Rav Amar eno so Rav says he doesn't lose his count. Rabbi Yochanan Hamar Soser, even according to Rabbi Yochanan, who says in the other cases, of the case of the Mitzora and the case of the Nazirus of his son, who says he loses his count. That's where he was in his Nazirus. That's where Rabbi Yochanan, he's still in his 30-day period, or he's still in his days of Nazirus. That's where he loses his count. He loses everything. But Gidol Seir, Mishlam Nazirus here. But when it comes to Gidol Seir, the growth of the hair, he's completed his Nazirus. So Shmuel Amar. So Sarah Rish Lakish, Shmuel says he loses his count, even according to Rish Lakish, who says ain't so Sarah, that he says he doesn't lose his count. Hasam Shtei Nazirus. That's because there were two distinct Naziruses. By the Mitzora and the Nazirus of his son, there were two separate categories. But here it's his own Nazirus. It's just one Nazirus, and it's just in the time of Gidol Seir. So comes on Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says, "Akol Modin Shem Kidesh Seir Bidam." And by the way, all these cases, there's so many different commentaries on it, but we're just trying to make Nazir as accessible as possible, so we're just giving one interpretation. So Rav Chisda says, "Akol Modim," everybody would admit, Shem Kiddush Seir B'dam Elo Takana. So what's the case here? The case is that once you have brought the sacrifices, and then the Nazir brought the sacrifices, and after he sprinkled the blood on the altar, he somehow became tamei from a dead body before he cut his hair. So then he has no takana. Everybody would admit that he has no takana under those circumstances, meaning to say he can never, under those circumstances, ever drink wine again or bring sacrifices and cut his hair again. And he's going to and he can never come in contact with the dead. Because since he didn't cut his hair and now he's tamei, he has all the prohibitions of a Nazir and he can't bring the sacrifice again because he already brought them. So therefore, he has no solution. I'll leave it to the Gemara, even though the Gemara had said, I call Modim, the Gemara wants to know according to whom. Yeah, I'll leave it to Rabbi Elazar. If you want to say this goes according to Rabbi Elazar's position, we're going to determine on 28a. Given Amar Tiglachas Markeves, Toch Moosi, Vuistor. Since according to Rabbi Eliezer, he says that the haircut is essential, and as long as he has not taken his haircut at the end of his Nazirus, he's still prohibited to do all the things of a Nazir. So if that's the case, the haircut is essential. It's still considered within the days of Nazirus for Listor, and so therefore he should have had to start over again. So it must be according to the Rabbanan who say Tigacha Sloma Keves. So it must be according to the Rabbanan who say the haircut is not essential, and therefore once you brought the sacrifices, you no longer are the prohibition to become tame from the dead body, meaning to say you're not so sir at that point anymore. So therefore must be according to the Rabbanan who says it must be according to the Rabbanan. The Gemara says, well, the Rabbanan. The Gemara says, so if that's the case, if it's according to the Rabbanan, what's the problem? It's not required. So the Gemara says it could be according to the Rabbanan. What does it mean, ein lo takana? It doesn't mean he can never do any of those things again of drinking wine or coming in contact with the dead body. It means ein lo takana mitzvahs kiluach. He's never going to be able to fulfill the mitzvah of cutting his hair, and he's going to be allowed to drink the wine and become in contact with his dead immediately, even without cutting his hair. That since he can't cut his hair in a state of ritual purity, he has lost the mitzvah. That's how Tosfos explains it. So and the reason is because the as we'll see, the Nazir has to burn his hair after he brings the sacrifices. Since he's tamei, he's not going to be able to do that, and so therefore he's not going to be able to fulfill this mitzvah. Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Chanina, Nazir shekol lo yamav lokal atumah meinu lokal tekachas. So Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina says that if you have a Nazirite who's completed his 30 days of Nazirus, but he has not yet brought his sacrifices, if he intentionally becomes tamei, then we're going to say he gets lashes for the ritual impurity, but he does not get lashes for getting a haircut or drinking wine. So the Gemara asks the question, because it says in the verse, all the days of Nazirus to Hashem, so that's to teach us, since it says in the verse, all the days of Nazirus to Hashem, you're not allowed to come in contact with the dead body. It means the days after he completed 30, like the days before, until he brings a korban, he can't become tamei until he finishes Nazirus. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, he should also get lashes for getting a haircut. Because it says all the days of his Nazirus, he can't bring a razor on his head. So it's this is to say that the days after Nazirus are like the days before. And furthermore, he shouldn't be able to get a haircut or able to drink wine either during those days. So the Gemara says, no, the case of Tumah is different. The Amar Rahmana, the verse tells us, "V'timei rosh nizro, v'misha nizro toloi lo barosho." The Torah says that with respect to ritual tumah, and from a dead body, it says v'chi amus meisal petabitom v'timei rosh nizro, and he is tamei, mitame, that the rosh of the Nazir. That it means it applies b'misha nazro shenizro taloi barosha, that this prohibition of coming in contact with the dead body applies to somebody who still has the nazirus on his head. So it's a specific extra verse about coming in contact with the dead body that you're still going to get lashes. The Gemara has a refutation of this. Meisvei nazir shekol yamav also galech v'lishtos yayin l'tamei meisim, that a nazir who has completed his days, he's not allowed to cut his hair, drink wine, or come in contact with the dead body. And if he does these things, any one of these three things, he gets lashes. So the Gemara indeed says to Yufta, this is indeed a refutation of Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina, who says that the lashes are only on Tumah Mesim, but not on haircut or wine. Okay, so we'll stop today's daf here. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to address it.